The southern United States remains a wilderness to this day. Dotted with small towns and urban areas, these piney woods are often forgotten except for the outdoorsmen who live here. Swamps and large tracts of wooded areas separate the few towns. There are no major cities here, just miles and miles of forest land and farms. Lurking in these forest lands is an animal few have seen, with names like swamp ape, skunk ape, booger, and Bigfoot. This animal is blamed for the deaths of pets, farm animals, and even people. To find this elusive animal, you have to know what to look for. And to know the animal's behavior, you have to hunt it.
I'm Don McDonald, and I'm a Bigfoot hunter. The main reason I hunt is to protect people. I get reports constantly from people who are having these things come up. A lot of people have their dogs killed, had their chickens killed. I know a family down around Red Bluff area down by Columbia. They lost 7 or 8 geese. A coyote is not going to mess with a goose. If there's 6 or 8 of them in a pile, a coyote is not going to mess with them. Something had plucked those geese and laid the feathers in a nice, neat pile and gone off with the rest of the body. Will a coyote do that? I think not. But you've got people that are having their homes beat on. They're scared to go outside at night. I know some families who will not go outside their front door unless they've got a gun in their hand. I talked to some people up in North Mississippi the other day. They actually heard something beating on the side of their house one night, and something peeked in on their 8-year-old daughter and looked in the window at their daughter. The daughter described it as a big gorilla-looking thing. Now, the bottom of the windowsill, you know, is about chest high. So this thing was leaned over and hunched over and looking in the window. The next night, they heard a loud racket outside and their air conditioner went off. Something had gone out there and picked up an outside air conditioner unit and threw it 30 feet across the yard. The first dent in the ground was 20 feet away. So something threw this thing 20 feet in the air before it hit the ground and rolled another 10 feet. A human can't do that. And it takes an opposable thumb to be able to pick something up and throw it. A bear can't, it's not gonna pick it up. It would swat it away. And there are a lot of bears in Mississippi. They are making a big comeback, but this was not a bear. No opposable thumb to pick it up.
Well, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and so as a youngster I was familiar with the stories about Bigfoot. I actually saw the Patterson-Gimlin film at the Spokane Coliseum with my brother and my dad. And one thing sort of led to another. It steeled my interests that were already budding in natural history and primate and human evolution. And so the prospect of there being this, maybe a missing link or some primitive form of human out in the wilds of the Northwest was a fascinating prospect for a young mind.
I started walking down the hill. Well, the moon had come out and I could see to walk, so I didn't have my flashlight on. Well, I got probably halfway down and I saw what I thought from a distance was a tree. And as I got closer to it, I realized there's no tree there. That tree would have been in the way when I was raking hay. It would have been in the way. I wouldn't have been able to rake that right there. So I said, So I eased on down and got a little closer. Well, as I got probably, I would say 40 yards from it, it moved. But when it moved, I stopped. And I had my flashlight in my hand, so I turned my light on and I shined up. And when I shined up, this creature turned away from me and stepped down into the creek behind the trees. I have a extremely large hand. My hand would have looked like a child's hand inside the hand that I saw hanging down beside this creature. Well, I'm not, I turned and I ran. I'm not gonna lie. All I had with me was a little .22 Magnum pistol is all I had on me, because that's what I use for coyotes. So I turned and I ran. And I got back to the top of the hill and I told my cousin, I said, hand me your AR. I said, man, I don't know what this is. I said, but it's big. I said, it's taller than I am. It's bigger than I am. I said, it's huge.
We went into the area where the witness had seen the creature, me and T. Lancaster. We wasn't in the woods long before my 2 youngest sons started radioing us on our next telephones, telling us that they had seen a creature. They stood there and watched it for about 5 minutes. The older of the two, which is the braver of the two, decided he was going to move in closer. He said when he made motion towards the creature, he said the creature in turn did the same and moved closer to him, to the point where they were about 80 feet from each other. They stood there and looked at it for about 3 to 5 minutes. The creature took off down a hill after, I guess, it got uncomfortable. And it was right about the same time period that I had seen something out of my right side peripheral vision. And then I became overcome by something that I haven't ever been able to explain. At the time I was in the woods, T. Lancaster had already left me to go to the kids since they were having the sighting. He had left the woods, left me there alone. And at the point in time when I had just seen that, that's when I went into what I explain as a breakdown, or I laid down on the ground, felt really ill, very unusual feeling, nothing like I'd ever felt before. And then soon after that, it probably lasted maybe a couple minutes, and I was fine. I got up and I walked out of the woods. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. It's the first time, it's the last time, hopefully, because that was a strange feeling. But I think that's the closest I ever come to an actual encounter. Whatever it was, something had an effect on me.
My experience was, basically, it was one day, I was up at my grandparents' up at Carmiley, and I was going down to the neighbours down the road to pick up the newspapers because they'd get delivered down the road, and it was something that we were always quite happy to do because the neighbour, Mrs. Sturrock, would give you a sweetie, you know, and so me and the dog were heading, there's a wee track that leads from the property down onto another track before you get onto the tarmac road. There's a curve in this track, and I'm just walking down onto the wee farm track, and the dog I was with, she just stopped dead, and she started whining and snarling, and I looked at her and I remember seeing the hair on her back was just up, you know, her hackles were up, she was kind of baring her teeth, her eyes were bulging, it was like she couldn't decide how to react to something. And you know, I was a kid, so I was kind of just walked past her, or probably ran past her, you know, and then kind of ended up just onto the farm track. And I look up and there's just this big black figure standing along the track, and it had its back to me, and it was bending down a branch of this ash tree that was in the side of the road, and it was just looking at the leaves on the end of this ash tree. It hadn't broken it off or anything, it was just looking at it. And it was pretty tall, but it was really broad, absolutely pure black. I didn't know what it was, I just stood in shock and stared at it for probably a couple of seconds. It didn't seem to know I was there until I screamed. And then the arm comes down and it slowly starts to turn to its right. And I was off, didn't see its face, just off back to the house, belting on the kitchen door, absolutely floods of tears, screaming, there's a monster, I've seen a monster. And they were like, oh no, it must be a neighbour. I'm thinking, you know, it wasn't a bloody neighbour, you know, it was, to me it was a monster. And the way the dog was, you know, she was freaking out, absolutely freaking out. And to the dog's credit, she stayed put till I started running, and then we're both up that track, you know. And that was the first time I saw something strange. And then sometime later, we were driving up the wee tarmac road, about to turn right onto the farm track, and just up a couple of 100 yards up the road at the entrance to the quarry, there's a large greyish figure standing right in the middle of the road, looking down the road towards us, and there was an orange reflection coming from its eyes. Now at the time, I thought, oh, that just must be a person. It was only later, many, many years later, when I started looking at this, I realised it couldn't be. As I say, it was an accidental watching of Finding Bigfoot that made me start thinking, that's what I saw. The 30 years passed with me thinking, I don't know what that is. It was kind of in the back of my mind. It kind of recedes more in the back of your mind as life kind of takes over, you know. And it was just an accidental viewing of that programme, and I started to think, these details are very, very like what I've seen. but that's not possible. Bigfoot's an American thing. It's not, I've never heard of that in Britain. And then I started to look into, well, all the American stuff to see if the details did match, if the descriptions matched, if all these other circumstances, you know, it's like it was just so similar that I thought, okay. So I started looking at the British stuff to see if there was any British stuff, and that's when I started coming across, I think the first thing I came across was there was a couple of sightings reported up at Torfins in Aberdeenshire back in the mid-90s, and there was a cryptozoologist who was quite prolific at the time called Mark Fraser, and he documented these sightings. And these guys had been out in the woods around Torfins, and they'd seen a large dark figure with kind of reddish glowing eyes, as they described it. And I think the first time they saw it, one of the guys threw a stone at it and it disappeared into the woods, and then they saw it a wee while later. There was 3 of them, and it actually chased them when they were in the car, and they described it. Now that made me think, God, that's not that far from where I saw something, and I just started researching it more. And then I found, yeah, there's a lot more stuff that sounds like what I've described, and then I found out, God, it's all over Britain. And then that's when I started speaking to, you know, Debbie and stuff like that, and found out I'm not the only person that's had this, and their experiences are so similar to mine.
We were going up the hill, and the dog heard something and alerted and bolted up ahead of us. When we got to the top of the hill, we heard the dog whelp real loud, and then come bolting back between us with his tail tucked between his legs. Now, us being, you know, Boy Scouts and teenagers, we had to go find out what was going on. We got to the top of the hill, and there was this dead 120 to 150 pound hog laying there, and it was still quivering. It was so freshly dead. Its back legs were snapped, it were broken. And we looked up in the tree, and what we thought was a limb about 6 feet off the ground, it was actually a rib bone from that hog. Something had grabbed that hog by the back legs, slammed it into the tree so dead-gum hard that it broke a rib and stuck it into the side of that pine tree. And when the dog come up, I guess it ran it off, and we saw some ruffled up leaves, so we followed them down to the bottom. And when we got to the bottom of the creek down there, that's where we found the 16-inch track at the bottom of the hill. It was a 5-toed track, so obviously that means there's a healthy breeding population. When you start getting into loss of digits, that's where you start getting some inbreeding, which is going to happen every time that situation comes about. But that was a real good encounter there. I didn't actually get to see one, but finding that hog, no animal, no human can pick up a 100-something pound hog and slam it 6 feet off the ground into a tree that hard. Just can't happen.
Why me? Why did I see him? Why me that day and not 10 minutes more and I might have gone, or an hour and a half before and I wouldn't have been there? So why did that happen that day? And the most sensible, logical answer is it just happened by happenstance. It just happened. I just happened to be there. But that just happened has took 34 years for me, and I'm still 34 years on, want to go and camp there at night and see if I can see him again. That's the logical side of my brain. But Debbie, the witness, there's no way I ever want to see that again. Never. I don't ever want to see that again. Never. I don't want my girls to see it. I don't want you to see it. I don't want anyone to ever feel that frightened that they feel like they need to lock the door and never come out again. Because that's how I felt. I'm choking up now because I'm back there. I wanted to get away as quickly as I could to my mum. I wanted my mum. I thought, he's going to get me, he's going to kill me, he's going to grab me, he's going to take me. All of that in an eighth of a second going through your brain, with your logical brain going, get up and run, girl, get up and run. I grabbed my friend and threw her to the floor. I kicked her to the floor so he'd get her. You get her and don't get me. But that fear is still there in me to this day, and I can't make that go away. I can soften it, and I can look at it logically, and I can say, Debbie, these other people feel like this. There's other people out there who feel like you. And that makes me get through the day. But at the end of the day, I'm still that 15-year-old kid who hasn't got an answer, who doesn't know, who wants somebody to come and say to me, there's the answer. I'll take it all away. I'll take all your fear away. You never have to do another radio show. You never have to write another article. I'll take it away and I won't do it. I'd still have that fear because of the witnesses, because there's other witnesses out there who feel like that. And I couldn't sleep at night knowing that I had done everything I could to make that person feel better. Yeah. So if that's all I ever do, if I never prove there's a wild man, and I never convince people to go and look, I'll know that I've done everything I can do. And another part of me is, I want you to go out and enjoy the woods. I want you to get back to nature. It stopped me. It was my favourite place to be, and it stopped me going. It stopped me going. It stopped me doing something I loved. I'm sorry.
No, don't apologise. Just have a minute. 5 minutes.
No, I want to get it over and done with. It's just because I'm back there. That's what it does to me. This is the real me. This is the 15-year-old that saw him. Not the educated 50-year-old who, you know, can write it down on paper and logicalise it all and put it in a little box and make it nice and safe for myself. This is how I feel when I'm in the wood. The minute it goes dark, the minute it gets dusk, I'm gone. I can't do it. I think he's behind every tree. I think he's going to pop up in front of me. Why would he do it? He wouldn't do that. It's ridiculous. But that's the only way I can prove that I saw something that scared me this much. Because I don't scare easy. And to carry it on all this time, I can think about my wedding, my children's births, all of that. Just make me feel like this, you know. But to just think of that split second, that little 10 seconds that changed my life, this is what happened.
The very first time I encountered the animal, I was a pre-med student at Rollins College, Winter Park, Florida, and pulled my grocery bag out and was going to head back to the apartment. When I stood up, I saw this thing standing behind a lamppost right off the parking lot in the shadows. And at first I thought it was a person, but it wasn't. It was much taller, not a whole lot taller, but it was taller than an average person. And I could tell that it was hairy, even though it was very, very shadowy. I could see the white of the eyes, but that's about all I could see. I knew it was some sort of a creature. And, I'd froze because I was pretty scared at the moment. And as I sat there or stood there looking at it, it eventually took interest in the trash dumpster, which was off to its left, my right, and kept looking back and forth, not really quickly, but I eventually realized it was more interested in probably feeding out of the dumpster than it was in me. And I began backing up to the landing for the stairway that went up to the second story, and over a period of a few minutes backed all the way up to the level where my apartment was, set my groceries down on the ground long enough to unlock my door to get inside, and when I turned back around, it was gone.
For me, it was a bit of an unusual thing to see and hear about initially, because I thought, well, how does such a small country sustain such a large animal and the amount of food that these things are going to eat? However, reports came flooding in. I remember seeing them in the early 80s, actually. That was the very first incident I actually heard of. And that was at Cannock Chase. But it had been mixed up with, walking tall, dogmen type experiences as well in that location. So it would seem there was a numerous different things being reported there. My first investigation was 1991 of a Bigfoot incident that took place at Cannock Chase again, in the woods, in a place called near Walker Woods Reservoir. Now, it's quite a large location, and the story is that, because I interviewed these two guys, and they were in the 30s, I believe they were absolutely being legitimate when they were telling me about their experiences, and I could not find any form of deception taking place. They'd been out there in the woods, it was at night, and they were heading home. And they thought somebody was actually following them. And they kept stopping and looking around, couldn't see anything. They carried on a little bit further, they could hear the crunching of branches and twigs and things. And this, whoever it was getting closer. Made no attempt to hide itself in a sense of making sure that it was heard. big branches, twigs were snapping, maybe as if, he even mentioned that they thought it was being done on purpose, as if to say, hey, I am here. And they suddenly got this feeling as they were moving on that they were being watched, and this oppressive feeling came over them. And they started to get a little bit worried. Now, as time went on, they quickened the pace. This thing quickened its pace to the point where they ended up running. I guess panic, fight or flight steps in, this panic, one runs, the other one's running. So they got these two guys, it's around about 11:15 at night, running through these woods crazily, trying to get away from something they cannot see, but are hearing. Now at some point, when they stopped, because they purposely stopped sometime, and then just to listen, are we being pursued? And it was dead quiet, and they thought, okay, it's not with us anymore, whatever it was, it's not there. And they didn't really know what was going on. But at that moment, just seconds later, there was this almighty thump, as if something had just landed right next to them. And they could hear this breathing, they could hear the movement of this thing. It was only about 8 foot away, 8 or 9 foot away, amongst this bush. The bush was moving, and yet they couldn't see anything. They could see nothing. But they described from the sound that this thing was bigger than the average human. Its weight, its posture, the sound of it in the environment, they just knew that this thing was something really, really weird. And they absolutely freaked out. And in fact, they actually separated in panic. One of them lost each other, so they ended up running off in different directions. And of course, when I'm interviewing, and one of these guys says, I've been going up there towards the reservoir for years. He said, I'm never going up there again, ever.
Well, the question of what Bigfoot is it remains a perplexing one. I mean, my null hypothesis, my working hypothesis, based on the evidence that I have encountered, by far the majority of the evidence I've encountered, suggests that it's a great ape. And by that I mean it's more closely allied with the other existing great apes, part of an extensive radiation of which chimps, orangs, and gorillas are just the fleeting remnants of these relic populations in tropical refugia that are on the verge of extinction. Much earlier in geologic time, the ape radiation was much more diverse, much broader, and included the temperate zones of Europe and Southern Asia, and had contained a great diversity in body size and in diet and locomotor habits, and included a primate that was gigantic, Gigantopithecus. It achieved dimensions that makes it the right size in the right place at the right time to be a likely ancestor of the Sasquatch. Well, there are many who argue that these creatures are much more intelligent and much more human than that. And there are some bits of evidence. The possibility of hybridization exists, but the only accounts for which I've had any taken seriously at all describe a hybrid offspring that was unhealthy, was sickly, and died very young, suggesting that there were chromosomal aberrations and anomalies that prevented a viable offspring to be produced. That suggests some distance. I mean, it's fairly close, but some distance. At least there was the potential of creating a fertilized egg and an infant that grew to some degree of maturation.
Probably the most exciting Bigfoot encounter occurred in October of 2008 at Salt Fork State Park in southeastern Ohio. Myself and another investigator were out just looking for other researchers that night. Weren't intending to do field research, weren't intending to collect any evidence or have any experiences, just looking for the other researchers. And we came to a picnic area. There had been sightings at this picnic area. And in that picnic area, we had rocks thrown at us. We heard something large moving through the brush. We returned to that picnic area later in the night, about 4:30 in the morning, and I actually saw a figure. I don't know exactly what it was, some kind of large figure rise up from behind a 4-foot tall brush, real thick briars and brush. And I can't say exactly what it was, but it did appear to have the shape of a human, although a very large human, massive shoulders, a conical bullet type head to it, and it was just all dark. I couldn't see any features, I couldn't see its face. My high beams actually went across the front of this figure as I was backing out of the parking lot. I did catch a white bluish eye shine, just for a split second. When I pulled the car back in and put the high beams on the bush and jumped out with a spotlight to confirm what I'd seen, whatever was there was gone.
Went into the woods anyhow, and we were building an assault course. You know, what you have in the army and whatever, rope swings, you know, things that you climb up on, tree platforms. We made one of them all the way through the wood, you know, from one end to the other. And we thought, you know, we were there with three friends of us at there. Well, there were me, 2 other friends. And my other friend went home early. He just disappeared. So me and Mark Ormby, we just thought, oh, we'll give it a run through. So we ran from one end to the other, just going through the assault course, seeing if it worked well. And we got to the far end, and it's like a fallen down tree that was there. I remember the fallen down tree part, and we were stood there for a while. And we weren't far from the actual walkway itself. It wasn't far. I said 15, 20 foot away. I think I saw it first, actually. Yes, I saw it first because I said, look, there's somebody coming. I said I thought they were walking the dog, and it stopped. I remember it stopping, like it could hear us or something, messing around, mucking around and stuff. And it turned. It stopped, it turned, but as I saw the widthness of it, how wide it was as it turned, I'm thinking it's not a person. So I didn't know where to put myself, really. And it just made the sound it made was just, I don't know, it was like a screechy, groany sound that it made. Like, no, I can't even do it. I can't even do the impression of it. I wouldn't even try. And it just, but you could make out the detail of it. You see the muscle on it. I remember seeing the muscles on its arm, this side. Not much this side, but this side you could see its arm. And as it turned, you could see the bulkiness of it. And just before it made its grunting groan, you could see it breathe in and then exhale it. I'm thinking, oh. Yeah. And being a kid at 12 years old, 13, it's a bit too much for me, that. So I went, and I didn't want to go back for a long time. Years, actually. I took Janine there, my partner, just to show her. And even then, I felt I shouldn't have been there when I went back.
So I was actually on the porch talking on the phone with a female friend, and I saw, I had been looking at this spot for a while, and there was something dark in a ditch. And suddenly I saw this thing rise up, walk up out the ditch, just one step up out the ditch. It was a pretty deep ditch. One step out the ditch and cross over a gravel road and go off into the woods. And instantly on the phone, I'm like, I gotta let you go, I gotta let you go. I swear I just saw a Bigfoot. So I hung up, I got my buddy who was staying there at the same time, and we walked over to where I had seen this thing get up and walk across the road and into the woods. And there was nothing there, but there was a foul odor. That's the only thing we could ever, pick up from that. But it was so big and just jet black. This was in August. It was the heat of summer. It was in the evening, and it was so big and black. And at first I'm like, well, it's got to be someone, wearing a black hoodie, but there's no way. I mean, I cannot see anyone at all. The temperature was very high. I cannot see anyone at all wearing a black hoodie and just sitting in a ditch out next to a cornfield.
Doctors, lawyers, military people, policemen, they've all seen these creatures just like I have. So I got into hunting Bigfoot because I wanted answers. I wanted to see, what is this creature? How many of them are there? Where do they live all the time? Do they live in family groups? It's a mystery. I love a good mystery. So, once I got involved in it and began to understand that, no matter how much proof you hand to the scientific community, they're not going to believe it until, like I said, they can do an autopsy on one. Or necropsy, I guess, if it's an animal. But, I hunt Bigfoot. The mystery part of it, I've met a lot of interesting people. I enjoy the comradeship, the camaraderie of having a single goal with these people and enjoy doing this. And, like I said, I want to solve the mystery.
Where would they get the food from? They'd what? They'd hunt together, they'd forage like we did before farming was invented.
If you're talking about food, it's not a problem at all. There's plenty of animals, creatures. There's deer, wild boar, rabbits, squirrels.
Well, I would forage, I'd hedgerow, I'd fish, I'd use the streams, birds, eggs. There's a multitude of food out there that we can eat.
When you got the rivers, the streams, you got trout, salmon, crayfish. I mean, it's endless. That's only the animals that I know.
The food we eat now, we're not supposed to eat. We're not supposed to eat all this processed food. We're really not. With hormones injected and this injected and that injected. That's not the way to go, is it? We're supposed to be eating a natural diet like they would on a daily basis. We're supposed to be drinking clean water like they would on a daily basis. We're supposed to work out and use our bodies constantly all day. As a person, I know that you can adapt to anything. People can adapt. We're great at getting put into a situation we don't want to be in, but we conquer it. We adapt and we conquer. They've just been doing that forever.
They've been here thousands of years, you know, and they're taught naturally from birth to how to catch these animals, hunt, without being detected by humans at the same time.
There's food everywhere, and I think there's very few natural predators here in this country. You know, we may have these big wildcats, perhaps. You know, there's enough evidence to say there's a lot of them, but they wouldn't make a single dent on our livestock population, or with the deer, even, which are in endemic proportions at the moment, apparently nationwide. So I think when it comes to a creature like this surviving in our countryside, it's more a case of what isn't there to eat, and not what is there.
Southern Sasquatch hunters are acutely aware of all indigenous animals in the woods they hunt. Most have been outdoorsmen all their lives. They know the difference between a bear and something else. It's the difference between knowledge and experience. However, when a Southerner encounters something that should not be in their woods, the need to explain it is great. So far, hunters can only speculate what the Southern Sasquatch is. Their opinions vary as much as the description of the animal itself.
I'm fairly certain that what we're looking at is a undiscovered type of primate, which would put it in the great ape category. I'm not 100% certain that it would be a great ape other than a human type species, simply because the track evidence that I've seen for both the classic Sasquatch and the swamp ape shows parallel toes. And the only parallel toes in any great ape is that of a human. So Dr. Meldrum may be correct in his presumption that they're some sort of relic hominin. I'm not sure who's right. That's going to take a whole lot more research.
Well, the question of what Bigfoot is it remains a perplexing one. I mean, my null hypothesis, my working hypothesis, based on the evidence that I have encountered, by far the majority of the evidence I've encountered, suggests that it's a great ape. And by that I mean it's more closely allied with the other existing great apes, part of an extensive radiation of which chimps, orangs, and gorillas are just the fleeting remnants of these relic populations in tropical refugia that are on the verge of extinction. Much earlier in geologic time, the primate, the ape radiation was much more diverse, much broader, and included the temperate zones of Europe and Southern Asia, and had contained a great diversity in body size and in diet and locomotor habits, and included a primate that was gigantic, Gigantopithecus. You know, it achieved dimensions that makes it the right size in the right place at the right time to be a likely ancestor of the Sasquatch.
What is Bigfoot? You really won't know until one is put down and put on a slab for testing. What we believe it is, and based on 3 different DNA samples that I know have been tested, it came back classified as unknown primate. In 1994, the GCBRO shot one at a hunt at Monster Central over in northwest Louisiana. They had the blood tested from 2 or 3 different labs, and all 3 different labs came back unknown primate. They didn't have a body to compare it to. Now, since then, I have learned of a sample in Texas and another sample in Oklahoma hundreds of miles away, where one was actually shot. The blood turned in for testing, and it came back unknown primate. They had nothing to compare it to. So right now, it's classified as an unknown primate. It's not human in any shape, form, or fashion. It's a primate.
So I was coming up along a trail, which I believe, it could have been a human trail, but it wasn't one that was regularly used, I don't believe anyway. And it could have been used by Bigfoot, could have been, possibly. And as I was coming up this trail, I noticed a small stick that had been broken. So I proceeded to film with the phone. And sometimes if you're too close with a phone, it will just capture the background. The background will be in focus instead of the actual twig or whatever you're filming. So that's what happened. It was too close, and I didn't realize at the time, but it was actually filming the background. When I watched the video afterwards, I think the next day, I noticed in the background, thinking, maybe there might be something there. And yeah, as soon as I saw, got to the bottom, there was an actual figure, which looked like a gorilla. That's the only thing I can say. It actually looked like a gorilla.
To hunt the Southern Sasquatch, you need to know what to look for and what equipment you will need to procure a specimen. Simply going into the woods to camp or hunt will not work. The Southern Sasquatch is elusive and clever. The odds are you've been near one and never even knew it. The beast is always there, watching you.
As far as Bigfoot evidence you find out in the woods, I mean, there are 2 or 3 different kinds you're going to find. You're going to find possible tracks, which if you find a track, there's 2 reasons for that track. It made a mistake or it left it on purpose. We know from years of experience what to look for. If you see something that's got an arch in it, in the bottom of your foot, that's a human track. And this a human track looks a lot different. These are flatter all the way through, anywhere from 3 to 5 toes. And it takes a lot of experience to be able to learn the difference in those 2. Another thing you'll find, you might find a teepee structure out there where something's been hiding in. You look for, say there's several limbs around a tree. First thing you want to do is look at the ground. You want to see if you can find where the base of that tree is. Next thing you want to look for is look up in the tree to see if some limbs could have fell there. If there's no other possible explanation of how these things could have fell, one of 2 things has happened. Either somebody or something has put those limbs there. And you don't ever really know because you don't see these animals put it there. We find a lot of tipped limbs up around 7 or 8 foot tall where something has come through and it's taken the limbs and snapped them off. That way they can be more stealthy the next time they come through. just different things you learn to look at after a lot of years of experience, and you know what you're looking for then.
Where do they sleep? That is quite a difficult one for me to know. Which is well, if we knew, we would obviously be able to find them. So they do whatever they can and sleep whatever they can. Most likely in the most difficult place where humans can't get to, or where humans would want to go, you know, or would even think about going. You know, there's so many theories.
I think, yes, mine shafts would be great to look into. There was a sighting in Dorking Deepdene in Surrey, which is not so far away from here, where two brothers were exploring a mine shaft and they heard a roar come out, and they left the mine shaft, and then they were bluff charged in sound only. They couldn't see the creature, but a large creature bluff charged them through the foliage. They left the area. Now, that to me would indicate perhaps a family group, or a male with young living in the mine shaft, because the challenge was from outside of the mine shaft, I think, and that was a warning as far as I'm aware.
Fife, north of here, is full of mines, and there's quite a few sightings from Fife, you know, in Scotland, yeah. Up Bathgate Hills, there's the Silverman sighting from the 80s, which is quite interesting, a large silver greyish figure running alongside a car up the Bathgate Hills. I've got quite an interesting set of stories from a forum about a guy who was going up the Bathgate Hills. Every winter they would get chased off the hill, they found footprints in the car park in the snow and all this kind of thing. There's a big old silver mine under those hills, you know. So yeah, I think mines have a lot to, I do think they're probably used.
There's a theory in the United States that they follow railways, that follow power lines. You know, as a guide, this is a nice straight route to follow. Bigfoot sightings along these very old ancient monuments to me would just represent an old and passed down route that would be passed down to younger Bigfoot, just like elephants pass, you know, routes to water to their children and so on and so forth forever. I think that would be exactly the same thing. This has been here for 1,000 years, 2,000 years. This is a route we've always known. Now there's a new route, some pylons that follow this straight line across this hill. You can follow them to get there and get home.
You know, people get confused a lot of times at what direct evidence is versus physical evidence versus circumstantial evidence. You know, a lot of people think that witness testimony is just not evidence. Witness testimony actually is direct evidence. You know, it's the purest form of evidence you can have. It's accepted in a court of law. The next set of evidence you have is physical evidence. Now, physical evidence would constitute something like a fingerprint that can be matched back to something, a footprint that can be matched back to something. So plaster casts, especially those with dermal ridges authenticated by a forensic expert like, you know, Jimmy Chilcutt, that's physical evidence. The funny thing is hair samples kind of fall in the middle of that, because somebody sees it, they collect a hair sample, it comes back to an unknown species. Okay, that very well could be. But technically, hair samples and DNA samples, by definition, at least in the court of law, are all circumstantial. Now, in our particular case, it may not be, because we're just looking to prove that something exists out here that doesn't. Now, if science doesn't want to, and this is my jilt about, you know, what's it going to take to prove Bigfoot? Because science used to accept plaster cast of footprints. They did in the case of the Billy Ape, but they're not in the case of Bigfoot.
Probably casts will get me excited, because I know then that they've been through an area. Secondly, of course, DNA, but DNA has nothing really to back itself up with, because it has no common denominator as to where to go if it's not a creature that's ever been discovered before. Likewise, hair falls into that basically same category.
I would say scat would be great to get a urine sample. We could learn so much from that. Would be right up there along with DNA. DNA may tell us what speciation, but it's not telling us anything about its lifestyle. And so getting an idea how it lives and being able to use that to learn more about it is probably more precious than anything else we can do.
Now we have DNA. Are they going to pull the same, magic act and say, well, we're not going to accept that. We still need a body. We need to see where that comes from. Well, obviously, if there's something that's new that's not there before that has to be recatalogued, that should tell them that, hey, but will it? I don't know yet.
Eyewitness sightings are, you're always at the mercy of the credibility of the individual, and then their powers of observation and their ability to interpret the things that they observe. So eyewitness testimony alone is not going to make the ultimate case, in my opinion. It certainly is indicative that there's something that is common to the human experience in this regard, but it is often very subjective sort of evidence. The trace and physical evidence of footprints of hair, scat, and ultimately DNA will be much more telling.
Personally, I believe that I subscribe more to the theory that, in Asia, back several thousand years ago, there was a large ape that was called Gigantopithecus blacki. And, assuming that a land bridge did exist between Asia and the North American continent at that time, and that's pretty much been proven, I think we're looking at the adaptation, of a hominid that came, maybe, that was either a branch off of Gigantopithecus blacki. It's a creature. It's a great ape, is what it is. I mean, for lack of a better word, it's an animal that has adapted. It's learned to walk upright. It's learned to defend itself that way. A lot of animals adapt to various different things, but I mean, to get right down to it, I think that it is, it is a branch off of the great ape family tree.
Science is going to do what science is going to do. They're going to examine the bodies and think they know everything from taking that body, dissecting it, and looking, and they're going to look at what they've done with other animals. They're going to look at the eyes, and it kind of matches, a gorilla. They're going to look at how a gorilla acts. They're going to think that they know everything already, where they really should come to people like me, the GCBRO, and there's several other groups out there that have had a lot of experience with these things as far as the behavior. The behavior is the one thing they cannot come up with by any kind of dissection or looking at these creatures. There's no way they can do it.
What you have to have in order to be able to really put this together is photographic evidence supported by physical evidence, supported by DNA that says this is something other than a genome we know about, but it's related to or close to this genome, meaning human or some other ape. And then you have to have absolutely irrefutable chain of custody on the evidence, in addition to having all of the sightings attested by people who are accepted as being beyond reproach. You could have a body, that's fine, that works. In a simple world, that's true, but I'm not for killing anything, much less an animal that's apparently as rare as this one is.
My first encounter actually was in Texas, and I was using a thermal seeker, and it hit something within these reeds. And what happened is I pulled out some night vision, and whatever it was standing there in the reeds, which were 6 feet tall, and it was watching another researcher, kind of cutting brush. And it ducked right back down, and then it came back up. But it was always keeping its eye on that researcher, and that researcher, when he turned into it, it just kind of turned and boom, whoosh, and you heard this big whooshing noise, and it disappeared. And there was a big swath of the reeds that had been just plowed down, and that was really my first encounter.
Researchers who have not had a personal encounter are nevertheless drawn to the study by intriguing physical evidence and eyewitness testimony.
In all the years I've been doing this, and it'll be 52 years next week, I've interviewed thousands of people. Again, I've seen much evidence. I have never personally seen a UFO or a Bigfoot, even though I believe in some cases during the 70s, I was probably pretty close to the creature, but never saw anything.
What I find to be most interesting is when I know that there is a witness who is truthful and honest, there's usually some little nuance, some little twist to the story that they're telling at the moment that didn't occur in the previous one and probably won't occur down the road. Or if it did, there's still a little variance to it. So that gets me going. The fact that, oh, this one said that the creature reached up and pulled its right earlobe, or something to that effect. Something that was intriguing enough for them to remember and relay that little bit of data to me. Makes it believable.
Oh, I think there's way more than just one species that we're looking at. They may be a related genera, but they're not necessarily the same species. They're reported all over the world, some of them no bigger than a chimpanzee, even smaller, like the orang pendek. There are others that are reported that have certain interesting issues that would make them the swamp ape that I believe and have dealt with. And then I think the Sasquatch, which probably is a whole lot taller than the other two, which is properly adapted to mountainous and forested areas, that it does that. And again, the track evidence supports it. I have tracks from the swamp ape that I'm sure are swamp ape tracks, and the shape of the foot and the way that the foot anatomy works underlying everything is pretty much identical to that of humans, but there's different adaptations in those tracks. In the case of the swamp ape, it's much more adapted to swimming and being in water and being in soft ground like a swamp, whereas the mountainous type of, oh, and I should also mention that it appears from the tracks I have that the toes are webbed in the swamp ape tracks. Whereas with the classic Bigfoot, the toes splay, the foot is more of a trapezoidal shape, but the underlying anatomy is still very similar to that of a human.
If Bigfoot, or when it's discovered, it's going to be probably the biggest scientific discovery ever. It's going to change the way everybody looks at things. Some of it good, some of it not good. There's way too many tree huggers out right now. They're going to want to take and all your tree cutting in areas where these things have been found, there would be no more pine tree cutting. Tree prices, pine or oak, whatever, are going to skyrocket through the roof because there's going to be very few places that timber companies can come in and cut the trees. Scientific-wise, it's going to be real good. It's going to change everybody's point of view, and all these people, including myself, who have been just given heck all these years, and I told you so. And that's going to be a wonderful feeling.
One of the first things that I get asked is how, in Britain today, in an urbanised society, a Bigfoot, woodwoose, wild man, whatever you wanted to call him, be him human or ape, could hide. Quite easily, in all honesty. We haven't looked at any of our cave systems. We've probably discovered 5 to 10% of them. We don't go out into the woods every day and look. And when we do, we're walking the dog or we're playing with the kids, and we're not looking up and we're not looking down. We're just going about our normal, everyday human life. So we're already distracted. You could be sat 3 feet away from you in a bush and you wouldn't have a clue. You wouldn't know.
To be honest with you, I don't expect to see one myself. I simply don't expect to see one because for them, everything they do is about concealing themselves. Everything they do is about hiding from humans, obviously. Yeah, and from animals as well. Hiding and ready to jump out on deers, for example. So it's natural for them, but I think it's a matter of life and death. A matter of life and death for them.
I don't think it's a stretch in the imagination to think that they're doing things like creating ditches in the deeper woods, sticking logs and branches over them and hiding in there, you know, but unless you're brave enough to really go raking, you know, how hard can it be though to hide in, say, a load of brambles or a bunch of gorse bushes? It could be that simple.
The most asked question would probably be, where are the skeletons? Where are the bodies? And it's a very valid question. Also, is Britain large enough to support such a species? And the last question I have is this creature flesh and blood or something more supernatural? And over the years, this species and perhaps others that live in the wilds have seen what evil man can do. So it really comes as no surprise to me that this species, the wild man, the woodwose, Bigfoot, the werewolf, if it exists, would certainly do its utmost to avoid contact with human beings. It's a simple case of survival, and they're fantastic at it.
So quickly, Deb, obviously, what's this last 2 years? I mean, obviously we're out in Scotland doing a night investigation.
There's two things I'm going to say on that. One, I don't really know. I'm filling up and I don't want to fill up on camera. It's, to me, to be able to come back and stand in the dark like this after this time because of Elusive and all the witnesses that have come forward and all the people that have helped along the way gave me the strength to be here today in the dark, in a forest, in the middle of the wilds, yeah? And I might be struggling, but I'll be back, yeah? And I don't really know. And it's also given me that fear was mine. That wasn't what he put on me, that was my fear. And if he's out there or he stood 10 feet away, I think he knows that now, yeah? And we're at peace, me and him. We can, go our separate ways and just carry on doing what we're doing.
Just think of where you've come since 12 months since you went back to Burial Hill over a year ago.
It's more.
It was
2
a massive,
years. It's about,
big deal
it's
for
about
you.
2
That
years
wasn't it?
ago. Getting
and
out.
Look where you are now.
In the woods, even if you can only do 4 or 5 steps from the car, do those 4 or 5 steps, and next time do 6, and next time do 7, and eventually you'll end up like this, And I couldn't be happier. You could give me a choice now of whether you give me £1,000 or we just stay another night, and I'd stay another night.
Yeah.
And that's thanks to you.
No, everyone's. It's a group effort. It's
yeah.
If I hadn't have been able to speak about it that day and say everything that I needed to say and feel comfortable being able to say it, I wouldn't be stood here today. I would still be stuck in the house terrified. Yeah.
This is why we take the statements. This is why.
Yeah.
You just got to. I don't really know how to put it into words. It's incredibly emotional for me to just be standing here now. Now I'm going back to.
Yeah.
And now I would hold out my hand to him because I don't see anyone being harmed. I don't see anyone being hurt. I know not all things are perfect and lovely and nice. I know that. But we've just stayed in this forest, in the dark, enjoying ourselves with quite a few, sat silently. And it's just an amazing place to be. And they could be 5 feet away from that light and you just wouldn't know.
Yeah, it's amazing that.
Yeah, so don't get disheartened. If you're out and you're researching, we're in the middle of Scotland and we're still struggling. It is hard and you just have to keep at it. You just have to keep at it. You don't get some every day.
Again, I think it's either an undiscovered North American primate that has probably existed here long before we settled on this continent, or it's some type of an ancient human of some sort, whether we want to push forward and say Neanderthal, or if we want to say some other type of ancient human species. That's where I steer. I try to stay away from the paranormal because, a lot of people say it may be an alien or it may be some spiritual thing. I think it's a living, breathing being, whatever it is. It's real. It's leaving footprints. It's physical. So I think we have whatever it is. It's a living, breathing being.
Some will never believe in Sasquatch until they see one or have a personal encounter. But to many, this creature is real, and they have had real experiences. It's the difference between believing and knowing. Sasquatch remains an elusive and mysterious creature. However, if Sasquatch hunters have their way, the physical proof of this animal will be presented to science one day soon.